suffering of displaced people in Marib exacerbates amid cuts in international assistance. European Union allocates extra funding to address the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. Government forces deepened Houthi attacks on Al Jaw front. Good evening. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. I'm Abir Ali and you're watching the English news. The United Nations envoy to Yemen, Hans Grundberg, met in the UAE with the vice chairman of the Presidential Leadership Council, Aidarus Al-Zubaydi. The meeting discussed the start of an inclusive dialogue to the end of conflict in Yemen, which has been at war for nearly 9 years. The meeting also discussed ways to improve living conditions in Yemen and ways to make progress towards reaching a comprehensive ceasefire. The Undersecretary of Marib Government discussed with the Dutch ambassador to Yemen the humanitarian situation in the city. The meeting touched on the negative effects on the humanitarian situation in Marib as a result of the Houthi militias' continued escalation, sending sabotage cells and expanding randomly planting mines to target civilians. The displaced people in Marib continue to suffer amid severe cuts in international aid. The following report has more details.
Opportunities to live inside camps for the displaced are diminishing, with the reduction of relief aid by humanitarian organizations, which puts hundreds of thousands of displaced people in front of difficult and tiring challenges in obtaining the basic necessities of life in light of the collapsed military and economic conditions. The emergence of these humanitarian repercussions besieging the displaced prompted the creation of sustainable projects within the governorate that were presented by the British organizations Hans Muslim, with the efforts of a team of young people that provide services in the field of livelihood, and the establishment of special bakeries that provide roti bread for free to many families inside the camps.
This project has greatly contributed to alleviating the suffering of the students and their families by helping them save some of their children's expenses and motivating them to keep seeking education and not drawing out of school. Also, we have two bakeries supported by Hans Muslim organization in Marib Governorate that produce around 20,000 roti bread per day and distribute them to the displaced people in the Suwaidat camp and 4 other camps targeting 10,000 people daily. These projects have been going on for 2 years and are still continuing.
From here, the journey of life begins with the preparation and processing of quantities of roti heading towards the camps, where hundreds are waiting to get their daily share of these quantities. As many families inside the camps of Suwaidat, Jaw Nasim and other camps depend mainly on these food allowances from which more than 10,000 people benefit, and now they provide a kind of stability after the interruption of food baskets for months.
These meals brought by Hans Muslim organization helped us a lot, as some families cannot afford giving their children money to buy food, especially during this hard time and due to the war that has been going on for almost 9 years.
Displaced school students also have shares of these projects, as daily meals were allocated for many displaced students, helping them to create a suitable environment to receive education until the end of the day, which contributed to alleviating the burden on poor and homeless families, covering part of the costs of their children's expenses. There is no harsher life than that of those who live in camps for the displaced, where they lack the minimum necessities of life such as water, food, and medicine, in addition to being exposed to the most severe conditions of nature, letting the fate of their lives depend on the extent of providing humanitarian aid.
The European Union announced the allocation of funding of about €193 million to help the most vulnerable groups in Yemen. This report has more.
On the 20th of February, the European Commission announced over €193 million as funding for the most vulnerable people in Yemen. The funding is announced during the Riyadh International Humanitarian Forum, and it will provide the most vulnerable with life-saving assistance. as Yemen has been devastated by years of violence, displacement, economic and political crisis. 136 million of this amount will be provided to the EU's humanitarian partners, such as the UN and NGOs, to help meet emerging needs resulting from ongoing violence and sudden disasters. The EU funded activities including health, nutrition and food assistance, as well as water and sanitation to prevent malnutrition and transmission of epidemics. 55 million in development aid is reserved for food security and livelihood support, addressing both urgent food security needs as well as longer-term development and self-reliance. It aims at helping Yemenis gain a livelihood and producing food locally as part of a transition to a resilient and sustainable food system. During the visit to Riyadh, the Commissioner of the European Union will deliver an opening speech at the Riyadh International Humanitarian Forum. He also discussed the most pressing humanitarian issues with Prince Faisal bin Farhan, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Supervisor General of King Salman Humanitarian Aid and Relief Center, Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council, and Swedish State Secretary for International Development Cooperation. Ravaged by poverty, war, and economic collapse, Yemen faces acute humanitarian problems, in addition to funding gaps and subsequent aid reductions or cuts, which have worsened people's humanitarian needs in Yemen, adding that mainly women and children are at risk of further aid reduction.
Coastline. UNDP's support to replace equipment and provide financial grants enables the re-establishment of a centuries-old industry, fisheries. Once Yemen's second most valuable export, after oil and gas, the blue economy has the potential to help rejuvenate the economy and provide a valuable food source to millions of food insecure Yemenis.
قبل ما نستلم الماكينة كان الوضع يعلم بهالله، بس كان الوضع متعب، الماكينة تعبانة، نسرح ونضوج، شغلك محصور. والآن الحمد لله بعد ما استلمت الماكينة ده العمل ريض، وانا بت بعيد وقريب وانا مبسوط لي مطمن من المحرك اللي معي، انا عاطينا الامان كامل.
UNDP helps fisherfolk reduce operational costs, limit fuel consumption, and increase daily catch. As the changing climate and marine ecosystems demand more flexibility, modern equipment and new skills help fisherfolk to navigate unpredictable weather safely and limit their impact on an already fragile sea environment.
The World Food Programme released its latest report on the situation in Yemen. It said 70 million people are food insecure and there are more than 6 million people in emergency phase. It added that 3.5 million people acutely malnutritioned and that inadequate food consumption increased slightly in Yemen in December after decreasing for 3 consecutive months. 9 people were killed in Yemen after Houthi rebels launched an overnight attack on sites of the government forces in the northern province of Al-Jawf. Heavy armed confrontations took place between the government forces and the Houthi fighters in the city. This report has more details.
Peace efforts in the country are faltering at a time when the terrorist militia is escalating its military movements in the north of Al-Jawf and Sada. These new military incidents come after a lull that prevailed on the battlefronts for more than a year. Field data says that elements of the Houthi militia tried to launch a violent attack on the positions of government forces in Al-Shamiyah front, northwest of the center of the Balkan district in Sada. But the confrontation soon ended with the death of dozens of the attacking elements and the wounding of others.
The Houthi threat has been curbed and the enemy forces have suffered great losses.
Meanwhile, government forces issued several concentrated strikes targeting a Houthi military armored vehicle loaded with personnel en route to militia positions. Since the early hours of this morning in Al Yatma region of the Khabwa al-Shaf district northwest of Al-Jawf, severe clashes have raged following a Houthi advancing attempt to reach the positions of members of the 6th district.
The Houthi militia has launched many attacks on various fronts, but the government forces have been able to resist them. Our soldiers are still adhering to the truce agreements. and we only defend our territory in the event of infiltration.
The Houthi militia suffered heavy losses in equipment after the forces of the 6th Military Region were able to break those attempts and secure the sites that the militia tried to reach. Most areas of military confrontations have been relatively calm since the conclusion of the armistice signed between the two parties. Military observers view these sudden Houthi movements on the front lines as an attempt to escalate the situation on the ground once more and gain the military upper hand.
3 civilians, including a 10-year-old child, were killed when a mine exploded in Hodeidah Governorate, western Yemen. Houthi mines have killed and injured more than 60 civilians in the governorate, most of them children, since the beginning of this year. Coming up in the news. The World Health Organization warns of malaria outbreak in Yemen.
أبي مات في شارع 40 دحين أنا أشقى على أسرتي مع باقي اللي أنا أصرف عليهم كل شيء. أنا اسمي أنس رصيد سيف، عمري 12 سنة. أنا أشتغل بورشة حديد من الساعة 7 للساعة 6. أحيانا أسرع، أحيانا أقص، أحيانا أرنق، أحيانا أنقش، أي حاجة أنا أعمل. لا الساعة لما بين الساعة 6 أوقف. أنا وقفت الدراسة علشان ما فيش أحد يشقى على أسرتي، أدرس إخواني الباقي. من دون 4 وأنا الخامس. أحلم إني أفتح ورشة أبي وأشقى على أسرتي وأندي لهم مصاري. وأدرس أخوتي الآخر الجامعات ويطبخوا أي شيء.
Welcome back. The World Health Organization announced that 65% of Yemenis are at risk of contracting malaria. In a statement that the organization added that had visited the National Malaria Control Program in Aden to discuss efforts to prevent malaria and continuous control. More details are within this report.
An entomological study in internally displaced persons camps in Aden has confirmed the presence of Anopheles stephensi mosquito, which has significant consequences for malaria control and elimination among vulnerable urban population. The mosquito is being established in the region, and there is a risk that this invasive disease vector will spread to similarly densely populated and fragile urban areas. The threat posed by stephensi is similar to that of the Aedes mosquitoes, which spread diseases such as dengue and yellow fever. Because both species breed and thrive in open water containers, it is vital to integrate water sanitation and hygiene measures with larval control to prevent further spread across the Aden region and protect millions of people at risk. Poor access to healthcare, clean water and sanitation in the country put more people at risk of the life-threatening diseases. Yemen is living with the catastrophic consequences of a protracted conflict that has destroyed much of its vital infrastructure and brought the health system to the brink of collapse.
The Norwegian Refugee Council is contributing to help in addressing the water crisis in Yemen. The following report has more details.
The 9-year conflict has led to the destruction of almost everything in Yemen. Vital infrastructure has been destroyed, which left many communities without access to critical life-saving services, including water. According to OCHA, about 17.8 million people do not have safe drinking water and lack access to adequate sanitation services in Yemen. Millions of Yemenis have to walk for miles just to collect a few liters of water. It's a daily chore to get drinking water, and women and kids are nearly often the ones who must do it. Lack of access to clean water has also led to many health complications, like cholera and acute watery diarrhea that started in October 2016, leading to the country's worst cholera outbreak in modern history. Yemen's acute water scarcity poses a serious threat to the country's stability and security. The impacts of water shortage on economic growth and job creation. Water scarcity is especially acute in Yemen, where millions live in rural areas reliant on local agriculture. Farmers are frequently forced to travel long distance to obtain water to keep their crops alive. With the support of ECHO, the Danish Refugee Council has been working to ensure that people have access to safe, clean drinking water in Al Hudaydah. The Danish Refugee Council WASH teams constructed an elevated tank to store water, as well as water pipeline network and 40 water distribution stations to ensure that water can be distributed to a large region, including 2 big IDP settlements. Water improvements in Al Hudaydah were urgently needed, as there were unsustainable water stations in the areas of IDPs. Many were relying on contaminated well water, while others purchased water from water trucks.
The Yemeni government obtained a clear commitment from international organizations not to fund the printing of sectarian curricula prepared by the Houthi militia. According to sources, the government side held several meetings with international organizations and confirmed that it would not allow any support or funding to print sectarian curricula. The Houthi militia forced dozens of educators in Eb Governorate to attend sectarian courses. Educational sources said that the Houthi militia focuses in its courses on the amendments made in the curricula, in addition to training them with sectarian ideas based on targeting Islamic beliefs. The Yemeni Musnad Day, or Amharic calligraphy, is held on the 21st of February every year. Musnad is a traditional Yemeni calligraphy which is celebrated as a national symbol and historical legacy of Yemen.
We have been using the Musnad handwriting when we was in the desert. We are celebrating the Musnad Day to establish the Yemeni traditions. It is one of the Yemeni historical symbols. We are learning this Musnad calligraphy to know more about our history and our civilization. The Yemeni generations have to learn this Musnad calligraphy to know their history.
A Saudi source told Reuters that Saudi Arabia will deposit $1 billion in the central bank of Yemen. Well-informed Yemeni government sources confirmed that arrangements are underway to sign the Saudi deposit agreement for the central bank of Yemen within hours. Here is a reminder of the main headlines. The suffering of displaced people in Marib exacerbates amid cuts in international assistance. European Union allocates extra funding to address the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. Government forces defend Houthi attacks on Al Jawf fronts. This is the end of the news. It was Abir Ali, and thank you for watching.